Welcome to another edition of Frankly Hockey here on Victory Plus. I'm Kate Pettersen, as always, joined by NHL insider Frank Seravalli. And Frank, we're hitting that quarter mark of the NHL season. It's time for report cards. And before we get into that, I want to know, do you consider yourself a tough grader or are you pretty fair?
Man, I feel like I had some really tough teachers. I had one teacher in high school who said, "Hey, yeah, there's only 2 A's that I'm handing out for the class this semester." And you're like, how do you know? They're like, oh, that's just life. Like only 2 people in here out of 26 are good enough to get an A. I'm not going to be that guy, but I would not consider myself an everyone gets a participation trophy grader. So I would say I lean more toward the tough side, but we'll see where it comes out.
All right. I said to you off camera, it's always the worst feeling when you were a kid. I was a good kid by most standards, but you're always a little nervous when your parents are in there for parent-teacher interview and you're going, I really hope they remember the good parts, not the bad parts, but we're about to find out. But hey, it's been a busy morning already because Maple Leafs general manager Brad Treliving spoke with the media with his quarter mark update. And Frank, we've talked extensively about the start of the Toronto Maple Leafs. They're on a 5-game skid right now. Now, saving grace, they're hosting the struggling St. Louis Blues tonight. But what stood out to me in his conversation with the media was just the disappointment felt throughout, but also, taking responsibility for this tough start to the season. So let's start with this clip of his assessment of the group.
I'd open it by saying, obviously, as we sit here today, we're not where we want to be or where we envision to be. Obviously, we've underperformed to this point, and I take full responsibility. I'm in charge of the hockey department. I've put the people in place on the ice, off the ice, so the responsibility lies with myself, and we start today and every day trying to get ourselves back up and going and improve where we are. There's lots of areas that we need to improve upon, and my job is working with Craig and the coaching staff and our players to get us back going and playing to a level that I believe we're capable of playing. And that was sort of the focus here the last couple of days, and as we go into tonight and beyond.
Yeah, look, Kate, it's great that Brad Treliving wants to fall on the sword and take responsibility because the buck does stop with him as this team's general manager. However, there wasn't, in my view, enough finger pointing or at least shouldering the blame here on the players. And there was some hints of that. Like he did say that this team has been too vanilla, and he was asked very specifically about the job security of Coach Craig Berube and said that it's not a thought. And look, he's right. This team had 108 points last season. They played with some intensity and some jam. Craig Berube hasn't changed, and he didn't wake up this year and forget how to coach. He didn't wake up and become a bad coach. This is a Stanley Cup winning coach. So for me, there were some hints at it, some sort of breadcrumbs that were dropped by Brad Treliving to kind of lead you in the direction that this team needs to play better, starting with the players. And yeah, it's not a properly constructed roster from top to bottom. I think everyone understands that this year in a transition year without Mitch Marner trying to figure out where this team goes next, that they were putting some window dressing up, some temporary stopgap solutions that were brought in to try and help this team on a short-term basis. But for me, it starts and it ends with the players at the very top of this roster. And yes, Austin Matthews may be banged up, but we're talking about the core of this team not playing with nearly enough intensity, work ethic, compete, attention to detail that's required to be a top flight team. They're not even close. They don't defend well. They don't work. And that's what stands out. It's the malaise that surrounded this team from top to bottom since this season has started, thinking, because we have high-end skill at the top of our lineup, that we're somehow going to float through this season and become a playoff team. Guess what? They're not good enough to do that, and their stars haven't been anywhere good enough to be able to do that.
If you're talking about these core players being the ones that have to spark this increased intensity. Are you alarmed that after morning skate today, Craig Berube's talking about, they had a day off, they came out a little flat, and he's in there yelling at them and trying to spark that? Are you alarmed that you're not seeing a natural response from the group?
I am, and we're only seeing it in certain key circumstances, like the second intermission against the Pittsburgh Penguins a couple weeks ago when they were down 3-0. Once in every blue moon is not enough to help the Toronto Maple Leafs get to where they need to be. And so I think what we're facing here are existential questions for the Leafs. It's not, can we put a Band-Aid on this season and somehow salvage it? This team, for me, wasn't a Stanley Cup contender last year. They weren't an authentic Stanley Cup contender last year. They certainly, they might not even be a playoff team this year. So where do they go from here? Trying to trade your way out of it, trying to fire your coach out of it. Those things aren't going to work. It starts and ends with the foundational pillars on which this roster is built. And if they cannot solve it, then the pillars quite simply need to be changed. And we've talked and danced around this for how many failed playoff runs before it ultimately still needs to come back to the core of this team is not good enough. And they're improperly constructed around the core based on some of the salary cap gymnastics that they've had to make for paying said core. So they're in a world of hurt right now, and I don't know how they dig and find their way out of it, because I don't know that it's solvable right in the here and now.
Yeah, definitely need to see a lot from them. Now, a small positive was that Austin Matthews, who's been out since November 11th, did skate for the first time this morning. And Trey Living also gave us an update on Chris Tanev, saying he'll be evaluated over the next week or two, but certainly defensively, as they try to outmuscle with offense, they could definitely use the boost of Chris Tanev back in the lineup. Okay, let's head to school. Let's check out some of these report cards, and we're going to start with the Edmonton Oilers. And I think most alarming for me this morning was the way we talked yesterday about Zach Hyman giving them the spark, giving them that juice, and then they fall flat yet again with a poor performance versus the Carolina Hurricanes. So where are you grading the overall Edmonton Oilers at this point in the season?
Man, the only thing separating the Edmonton Oilers from a failing grade right now is the fact that they've somehow found a way to manage to this point in the season, picking up wins and points that they otherwise should not have. When you're tied with the Philadelphia Flyers trying to inch your way to OT and you give up a goal with 23 seconds left in regulation after that team rope-a-doped you for 3 periods, you shouldn't have won. The goal was called back. You win in OT. Okay, you save yourself. You had no business winning last Monday night against the Columbus Blue Jackets on home ice before that trip started. Somehow you squeeze out 2 points there. The points that the Edmonton Oilers have milked have made this start to this season feel better than it is. And the truth surrounding this Edmonton team is that they've got 4 regulation wins. That's the same number of regulation wins as the Calgary Flames have so far this season. And by the way, the Flames have played 1 fewer game than the Oilers have so far, Kate. So we could be looking at a situation where this team is toward the bottom of the standings, is really struggling, and their numbers, their place in the standings have masked how poorly this team has played. Their forward group, they get a C because Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, and then now you could throw in Zach Hyman. Their top end guys have continued to produce. But what we've seen from this team so far this season is more than at any other time in the McDavid and Draisaitl era is the Edmonton Oilers have been so over-reliant and have gotten so little production from everywhere else in their forward group that that's the only thing keeping them afloat. Their bottom 6 gets a complete F. Their top 6 has been a lot better. And so on the whole, they get a C. Defensively, goaltending, 2 big fat Fs in red. That's really what it should be, because this team has struggled to defend. Every single person on this defense core has struggled to defend, starting with $9.5 million man Darnell Nurse, including $10.5 million man Evan Bouchard, and all the way down through this team's lineup. They make mistake after mistake. They seem to be clueless and careless with the puck. And they seem to be directionless without Paul Coffey as their assistant coach on defense. And Stuart Skinner and Cal Pickard have both been exceptionally below average.
Well, you mentioned the heavy reliance on 97 and 29 up top, especially the way Chris Knobloch had to deploy them late in the game yesterday, for example. How alarming is that for the sustainability of the Oilers, especially when we're talking about a season where you've got the Olympics lumped into the middle?
Yeah, high leverage hockey, Kate, is what's on the way. So if you think that you're just going to, hey, we're going to cruise along here and everything's going to be good and our stars are going to be rested when we get to the Stanley Cup playoffs, they're in a dogfight. And if they continue to play this way, this is through one quarter of the season, they're going to continue to be in a dogfight, because what we've had to ratchet down are expectations for this team and the number of points that they can accumulate just based on a math percentage. So the Oilers are in a tough spot here, and they've got to find some solutions. Everything that they've tried to this point hasn't worked. We'll talk about David Tomaszek later in the show. He was the Swedish Hockey League leading scorer from last season. He hasn't worked. Isaac Howard was sent down to the AHL after that sizable 1-for-1 swap over the summer. He has gone down to the AHL. Up front, Matt Savoie is finally getting going. That's clicking, and it seems like he's coming along and is going to be a player here as the season moves on. But where's this other support in their top six going to come from? They've got to find a way to get more help, more support, and be a lot less of a one-dimensional team.
Yeah, and they need that support pretty quick, because while we're only 20 games in, things are moving and shaking, and this is the time to bank those points and to have a little insurance moving down the stretch. Okay, let's flip over to the Boston Bruins. 12-9-0. They've exceeded expectations out the gate. They're first in the Atlantic Division. And Frank, what stands out to me, though, is not forgetting their slide earlier in the season. It's been spurts, but it's been spurts in both directions. So where do you have the Boston Bruins overall?
It's been a real roller coaster, Kate, as you pointed out. I mean, they started okay, lost 6 of 7, then went on an 8-game winning streak. And you're like, hey, will the real Boston Bruins please stand up? Which team do we have here? On an overall basis, I give the Bruins start to the season a B. And you might say, Frank, man, what a prick. You're such a bad grader. Why are you so tough? Because this team is in first place in their division. To me, I think they leave a lot to be desired, particularly with their defense. I gave them a C-, and obviously that defense core is going to look worse now without Charlie McAvoy for a bit after taking that puck to the face. But this defense should be the strength of this team. They should be able to play and put together a lot better effort on a night-to-night basis based on what they're spending on it, based on what they've spent to acquire some of these pieces. Their defense should be in a better spot than they are. Offensively, the Bruins have done a really good job. The fact that they have 2 double-digit goal scorers, the fact that their power play is as effective as it's been, they've been really good scoring-wise, and that part has been super impressive, and I don't know that I would have saw that coming. Like, if you had said to me before the season started, I thought that their strengths would have been flipped, that defensively they'd be better than they've been offensively, and that's been the opposite. And then you think about, how does this all come together? What does this mean for a Bruins team that we were heading into the season asking rebuild or playoff team? Well, obviously right now we're trending toward playoff team, but I don't think the Bruins are necessarily fooling anyone on what level of competitor this team is. Not a cup contender, but they could make things pretty interesting for Don Sweeney and company. Will they be sold on the idea that this team should be adding when it comes to the deadline? I don't think they're there yet, but I think it's been a fascinating start to the season both ways.
You talk about challenges defensively, and coming into the season, everyone was eyes on Jeremy Swayman. Can he bounce back? Is this the season? 8-5-0 with a .902 save percentage. He's started off closer to that form we're looking for. Why give him a C here? Why give their goaltending a C?
Yeah, it's well, first off, it's on the basis of both those guys. So Joonas Korpisalo has played a pretty significant chunk, 8 starts this season at an .878. He's been well below average. Swayman has been a lot better than the 892 that he had last season, but he's still pretty far off from his overall career average. When you consider the first, 175 games, 125 games that he played, he was kicking at a .919 save percentage. Obviously, last year brought that save percentage number way down. And I know it's an oversimplified stat or way to look at it, but 902 this season is a step in the right direction, but they're paying him to be an upper echelon goalie. He's getting paid like close to what a Connor Hellebuck's making. They need to get better from Jeremy Swayman. I think he's capable of better. And Joonas Korpisalo at 878, that's where the totality of their tandem comes in at a C.
All right, let's head over to the West and talk about the Vancouver Canucks. They've been bit by the injury bug, but also inconsistent play to start the season and not where you'd expect them to be. Now they're without Thatcher Demko for a handful of time, and he's really been a solid to their lineup, not getting the performance from Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes that we're used to. So with all of those things in mind, where are the Canucks in your mind?
Well, they've been obviously really middling. I'm actually relatively bullish on the Canucks that they've been able to keep their head above water, been able to hang in the race, given a lot of the things that you just talked about, right? Now Thatcher Demko's out for a little bit. Look, it all hinges on whether or not Elias Pettersson can get back to being a 100-point player. And I don't want to alarm anyone, but he's taken some significant steps in the right direction in the last handful of games. He's got 8 points in his last 4, 3 goals in the last 4. And this road trip has seemingly been really good for him. So if Elias Pettersson can get to the level that we all know that he can, if he can find a way back there methodically, brick by brick, well, I think it's, there are brighter days ahead for the Vancouver Canucks because every conversation becomes a little bit easier to have. There's less pressure, if it's possible, on this team to go out and find that number 2 center. If he's carrying the load, perhaps you need to spend less or be a little bit less aggressive in that acquisition. It makes every facet of your game a little bit easier because he's drawing matchups. You're finding spots where, other players can break through. And so, when I look at the grades for the Vancouver Canucks for this season, I'm weighting this a little bit on a positive trend that we've seen. I'm grading on a curve, so to speak, for what we've seen from Elias Pettersson over these last handful of games, that this second half of this quarter, the last 10 games or so, has been a lot better in my view. He can't just be a Selke trophy candidate. He needs to be a guy that is putting points on the board. And I think we've gotten a lot more of that of late from Pettersson.
All right. So when you look at the defense, where do you stack up that defense led by Quinn Hughes?
Yeah, I think it's been a mixed bag. I mean, Quinn Hughes is such a special player, but the rest of the group has just been okay. I think you need more from some of the guys in that group that have size, experience, their ability to defend around their goaltending. They've placed an extreme over reliance on their netminders. And, I think everyone was kind of holding their breath in Vancouver saying, if, this goaltending group could stay healthy and if Thatcher Demko could continue to play at the level that he could, maybe he can bail them out. But even his numbers were depressed over a period of time because they're just not limiting chances. What they're giving up is so significant, and that over-reliance over the course of an 82-game season is going to come to rear its ugly head. You can survive for 10 games, 15 games, but as you get closer to 30 and 40, the numbers aren't going to be pretty. And so that's what the Vancouver Canucks have tried to weigh here.
Yeah, 4-2 over their last 10 games, and they've got a tough test in the surging Dallas Stars coming up on Thursday. All right, let's wrap up our report cards with the LA Kings. We know Darcy Kemper has been playing very well. We know they've been very strong on the road, not so much at home. Where do you grade their overall performance and the expectation for them after this quarter mark?
Look, I think the Kings have been pretty good overall on the whole. They're going to get a B from me. I wasn't sure what to expect from this team heading into the season. Obviously, they've made the playoffs a handful of years in a row, haven't won a round. They've met their demise in the Edmonton Oilers, and it's not been a fun process trying to break through in the Pacific, but they also added a whole bunch of veterans. Their defense has looked pretty good. And their forward group, obviously to be expected based on the style that they play, which suppresses their ability to create some offense, it leaves you wanting more because I think they're capable of more. I think you see Quentin Byfield and the impact that he's making. I think, obviously Adrian Kempe with the new deal that he signed, he's at a point per game. That the offense has been good, but I think with a better scheme and style and structure, they could take that to the next level. Kemper has been really good. And so I'm looking at a team that since Corey Perry has joined the lineup, I think they're 8-3-2, something like that. It's been really kind of uncanny, the impact that he's had so far this season. And there's a lot of things to clean up in terms of trying to find a way to create more offense. But the way that they have knuckled down defensively, the byproduct, the end result of that structure and scheme that they play is something that is a nice recipe for success, they believe, when it comes to the playoffs.
You mentioned things they need to clean up. What are some of those areas that would make you a little more confident in the sustainability of this Kings team?
How about a power play that works? I mean, remember last year how much they had struggled, and then Kuzmenko came in. They went with that 5 forward mix for a while, and it took off, and it was really good down the stretch. Back to 24th. Could certainly find ways to add more goals to the board and win games if their power play can get it going again.
All right. Well, that was I think that was a fair assessment. I'll give you, I'll agree that you weren't a hard hitter, but I think you were still tough. I think that's a fair assessment.
It's all about being fair, being honest and fair. Yep. That's all anyone's looking for.
Fair enough. All right. Well, let's talk about some of our prospects. A great time to welcome in our next guest, Steven Ellis. He is a prospect analyst for the Daily Faceoff, and he's also our WHL insider here on Victory Plus. Steven, you've got your eye on a lot of young guns and keeping up with the young talent in the league. So I want to start today with the Chicago Blackhawks. Artyom Levshunov has been playing fantastic, arguably outplaying Sam Rinzel. So I want to know what you've seen from him. What has had him on this trajectory, and what stands out about his game so far with 10 assists in 17 games?
Steven, you're muted, sir.
Well, I should not be. No, there we go. Levshunov is one of the most adaptable defenders I've ever seen. Like, you look at his last couple of years, he's playing in Belarus in 22. Year after that, he goes to the Green Bay Gamblers, Michigan State the year after that. Then he spends most of his time last year in the AHL, but looks good in the NHL. Now he's a full-time NHL player. So you look at how many levels he's had to go through. In every season, he finds ways to get so much better. So, I'm a big Levshunov fan. I didn't expect him to be this impactful on the score sheet at this point of the season, but I don't think that most people expected the Blackhawks to be this dangerous either. And when you look at him, those 10 assists, he's playing on the top power play line. You look at the fact he's also a very big defenseman. He likes to shut guys down. Like, there's so many elements of his game that makes him so effective. And Sam Rinzel was the guy that I think most expected to have a bit of a better rookie season because he's older, couple of years more in college. It felt like he was ready to go. And by all counts, Levshunov's been better. So I think he's a guy who could be a top pairing defenseman long-term in the NHL. It's going to be pretty nice on the power play passing to guys like Bedard and Nazar and Frundell and Moore over the next 10, 15 years. So right now, I love what he's doing. He's definitely put himself in the Calder race, especially in November, where a lot of guys who were near the top last month, guys like Jacob Dobesh and Emmett Finney, have kind of fallen a little bit.
Well, I mean, I don't know if we even really have much of a Calder race with what Matthew Schaefer has been doing. And I just want to raise my hand and admit, so you can see it on screen, raise my hand and admit that I did pick Sam Rinzel to win the Calder this year. I thought maybe we'd get a taste of Matthew Schaefer. He'd be good. And then they figure out what to do with him this season. And he's been lights out. But on the Rinzel file, just to close that door, he sat as a healthy scratch over the weekend. Are you surprised at at just sort of, it's not that he hasn't been impactful, because when he's played, he's been fine, but there's been a handful of mistakes that have been really glaring.
Yeah, like it feels like he's not processing the game as quickly as we were kind of hoping he'd be able to do at this level. And when you're able to dominate against college, it's one thing, but he went straight to the NHL out of college. Like he didn't have this extra seasoning in the AHL. So I think a bit of adjustment was definitely expected. I just assumed he would be a bit better at this point because at every level he played, he never seemed to have much of an adjustment period. He just run in, immediately make an impact. So at the same time, I don't hate a young guy getting some time in the press box just to watch him overhead and just take a breather. Like you don't want this to be a confidence killer for him, but at the same time, as long as the coaching staff mentions like, hey, like we still see a bright future for you here. We're still a developing team. It's going to take some time. That's fine. I think he'll be okay.
Interesting. So the Edmonton Oilers, we talked about them and their poor quarter season grades, and they've been trying to figure out how to get production elsewhere in their lineup. Isaac Howard was one of those guys making that trade with Tampa, coming out of Michigan State, that a lot of people thought, hey, this guy could be a potential top 6 or middle 6 addition at some point. They've had to send him to AHL Bakersfield for more seasoning. What specifically do you want to see from him to get his game going?
Well, he was a guy that, for me, always should have gone to the AHL because, yeah, he was the Hobey Baker Award winner last year. But how many of those guys who dominate college as a third-year player end up becoming effective NHL players? It's actually a very small list. So for me, it was kind of like just go to the AHL, play a ton of minutes. When everyone's healthy in Edmonton, he was going to struggle for ice time. And even when there were some opportunities, it felt like he didn't go out there and take advantage of it. So I think it was in his first like 2 or 3 shifts, he already had 2 assists in his AHL debut. So that's going to be really good for his confidence going out there and playing a lot of minutes and put up a ton of points because he is a skilled forward. I do think he's going to have a good NHL career. But at the same time, when you're known for your goal scoring and you're not scoring, that's not a good thing for a player's confidence. And I think that's also partly why he left the University of Minnesota Duluth, where the year before he was that NTDP's the star goal scorer. Then he barely scores in his first year of college, switches schools and starts to figure it out. So I think right now you want him to go out there and feel confident in himself, being able to shoot from anywhere and not have to worry about losing ice time because he makes a couple mistakes. So I'm not worried about Howard's long-term viability here, but this always made the most sense to me that he'd spend significant time in the AHL, and I'm glad to see him there and already thriving early on.
Steven, we talked about the Toronto Maple Leafs off the top of the show. They're known for swinging big in terms of upside with a player in the draft. So Harry Nansi, 5th round pick of 2025. Last year, only 23 points in the OHL, but now this season, all of a sudden, he's near the top of the scoring race. So what's the lowdown on him? What have you seen that's made him so effective this season?
So he was one of the youngest players in the draft last year. He was only born 5 days before the draft cutoff. He was a 5th round pick by the Maple Leafs. And I think the fact that he was able to tie his production from last year in 50 fewer games this season is kind of nuts. But talking to some scouts before the draft, they said, like, look at Nansi because he clearly knows how to shoot the puck. He's a very good playmaker. He's not this super tough guy, but he can hit with his 6'3" frame. You put this all together, eventually he's going to figure it out in the OHL. But I don't think I expected it to be this season where he's already got 31 points in 22 games. He's a great puck passer. He just loves to make sure, or he's always scanning and looking for the right play. He's added a bit more physicality to his game. He is a lot more engaged on the boards. And I think that has made him a more fearful opponent. So Owen Sound last year, not a good team, not much going for them. This year they're better. Harry Nansi's a big part of that. And as a 5th round pick, it's looking less like he might be a long shot to be a 4th liner and more like, okay, I see the path forward because he does a lot of good things with and without the puck. And the fact that he can get the puck where it needs to be and he's got that size, that is good for him. So really like his game right now. Don't think he's going to be on Canada's World Junior team coming up, but I still think the fact that he's been able to rise this much offensively as a 5th round pick is very impressive.
All right, we got to talk about one of the great names in the 2026 draft and also shaping up to be one of the great players, and that's Ivar Stenberg and the season that he's had playing overseas. Tell us about this guy. What's his upside and where could he go on the draft board in June?
So his brother is Otto Stenberg, the St. Louis Blues prospect, and they've got another brother named Nut. So very good hockey family there. Nut. So it's a great name. Anyways, yeah, so 15 points in 19 games in Frölunda this year. Like, he's on pace for 41 points, which would be one of the most productive seasons ever by a U19 player in the top Swedish league. So that can't be ignored. He played a good majority of the season last year in the top pro league. Didn't get a ton of ice time, but every time he went and played against his own age group, he was productive. He had about 2 points per game in the Swedish U20 league. He was one of the best goal scorers at the U18s last year. He had 51 points internationally last year, which is absolutely incredible. This year, he already looks like one of Sweden's most important players for the World Juniors. And there have been a lot of scouts I've talked to who think he could be the number 2 prospect. Now, he is a skilled player. I think the one issue for him is that he's not physically strong, and he does get pushed around a little bit, and that will hurt him against guys like Gavin McKenna, Keaton Verhoff, Ethan Belchet in the draft. But from a pure skill perspective, few guys can be as productive, and I think he reminds me a little bit of what we saw last year with Victor Eklund, a guy that definitely lost some draft standing because he wasn't very big, but he was very productive regardless. So the way that Stenberg thinks the game, the way he can dangle just about anybody out there, there's a lot to like. I expect him to go early in the draft. Right now, though, he is my number 3 prospect.
Number 3. Okay, so Gavin McKenna has been okay. He hasn't been out of this world at Penn State. Give us an early preview of your next draft rankings. Will McKenna be 1, and how much has the gap been narrowed?
So my draft rankings come out tomorrow, so this is great timing. But right now, it's still McKenna. It is definitely the most narrow. I think we've seen it for this year, where Verhoff. There are some scouts who see him more as an Aaron Ekblad type player in the NHL, which I think that's a pretty good player given what we've seen from him in the playoffs the last couple of years, but some scouts aren't as excited. I'm a big Verhoff fan. I think he's number 2. Stenberg's 3, but I will say 2 other guys that are definitely closing the gap here too. Ethan Belchet's a Windsor. He's having an incredible season, as well as Tynan Lawrence out of the USHL. He's the best center in this draft, and that will help him go high, I believe. So really good two-way player, so intense, so competitive. It's a good top 10 this year. It's a very strong top 10.
Yeah, maybe the better comparison for Verhoff than Ekblad might be Alex Pietrangelo. What do you think of that?
I could see that, yeah. I think, we'll see kind of, like with Verhoff, he's put up a lot of points this year. It'll be interesting to see kind of how that season goes on, and I do expect him to be a big part of the World Junior team for Canada. I would expect Verhoff to have a bigger role at the World Juniors than McKenna, so we'll see what happens there.
Which is pretty rare for a 17-year-old.
Very. It's this is going to be a very young Canadian World Junior team, but it's going to be a strong World Junior team. When you also look at Xavier Villeneuve trying to put his mark on the team, could Landon DuPont get one of the final spots? Like there's a lot of good young defensemen coming up through hockey right now, and that's exciting.
Yeah, definitely exciting to watch. Matthew Schaefer, speaking of young defensemen, who's been lights out to start the season for the Islanders. Steven Ellis, prospect analyst for the Daily Faceoff and our WHL insider here on Victory Plus, joining us every week. Steven, thanks for today, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks so much, guys.
All right, Frank, we talked about the Edmonton Oilers and their ranking in your report card today, but I want to ask you, where do they go from here with David Tomasic?
Yeah, it's an interesting spot because remember last season, Kate, they pursued this guy relatively hard to come over. And there were other suitors that were interested in David Tomasic's services last year. And they convinced him. And the thought process was, this is a guy that needs to be in the top half of your lineup. He's obviously an offensive-minded player leading the Swedish Hockey League in scoring. What happens if this doesn't work? And so when it comes to Tomasic, who's been out of the lineup for most of the month of November, you can send him down because he's waiver exempt. It's the one sort of quirk for a guy that's not on an entry-level contract. You can send him down without needing waivers for this one season only. But do you do him a solid and try and trade him somewhere in the here and now, given that your roster constraints will exist, just to give this guy a solid for picking your team, giving you a chance it's not working? Is someone else willing to take a flyer on him and also get that money off your cap?
Right. Not a bad idea for the Edmonton Oilers. All right. In the world of social media, there was a cute moment last night for the Columbus Blue Jackets. Eric Brandson's son took center stage at the intermission on the ice. Take a look at these photos here. Meredith Gaudreau posting the one on the left. And if you take a look at the left corner, you can see Eric and his wife, Sarah, cheering him on. But a pretty big night for Benny on the ice. And of course, the Columbus Blue Jackets winning 4-3 in a shootout versus Montreal. So they got the win as well. But also, look at this video. Little Benny, and of course, he knows all of the players by name, so he's getting to give them a fist bump. And he is, if you follow Meredith, she's often posting with the good Bransons, and Sarah posts a lot of content with her kids. But what a cool moment. Unfortunately, Eric's still not available to play. He wasn't on the ice yesterday, but cool moment for little Benny. You got to love these moments. And Frank, we've talked about it. 20 years from now, he's got to look back and think, wow, that was pretty cool. Being around my dad's teammates, being on the ice, being in the room, and some of those experiences for the younger generations and all the kids of these players.
Yeah, no doubt. He's certainly going to remember that. And the Columbus Blue Jackets have actually been really scrappy of late, points in 5 straight games, I believe. And their schedule has been absolutely brutal, which brings us perfectly to our look at the sports books today, Kate, because I'm going to go against the Blue Jackets. They had a late start last night as a result of playing on Monday Night Hockey on Prime. And with that, they had to then travel after playing on home ice to Winnipeg after the game against a Jets team that I think on a good day probably overmatches them. So I'm going to take the Jets on the puck line tonight. These odds courtesy of our friends at BetMGM. And I'm going to say Jets -1.5 on the puck line. That's one way to try and find a way to get a little value here for a Blue Jackets team that's just been in an absolute grinder of a schedule. They've been out west. They were home for a quick spurt. I think they're wrapping up 8 games in 13 nights, which is crazy to think about. They're getting close to the tail end of that schedule. So the Jackets have just been in a grinder, but they found a way to squeeze out points here and there. They're hanging in there. They're hanging in the race. But tonight on the back-to-back with that travel to Winnipeg, I'm just going to take the Jets.
Yep, definitely not a puddle jump over to the peg. Okay, before we wrap up, they don't call him the Rat for nothing. He was up to his usual antics, and Marchie just always getting in there and jabbing and stirring the pot. Take a look at this.
Yeah. Oh, Quinn Hughes, yoink. I'll take that.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to skate away like nothing ever happened. First off, I wanted to highlight just the fun that Brad Marchand seems to have every night playing in the NHL. But I also wanted to touch quickly on the human nature and human aspect that Brad Marchand really seems to, he hits the nail on the head every time because he's authentic. And obviously, a couple weeks ago, we talked about Brad Marchand going back home to Nova Scotia to step in for his friend who had lost his daughter, and how special that moment was. But also him talking about getting to this age openly in the last week or so in an interview about the anxiety and the fear that rests within him to deliver on a night-to-night basis as a player getting older, thinking that the game might be passing him by. How do I keep up with this? How do I get ahead? You know, if I miss a day of training or skating or work, it eats away at him. The anxiety that's inside him to perform, obviously it's fueled him to be one of the best. But I think he verbalized it and expressed it in a way that so few have done, particularly in the NHL, that I just wanted to give him a hat tip to say thank you. Because, you know, he's a lot of things to a lot of different people. You mentioned Rat. I'd say one of the great pests of all time. But more than that, he just seems to be someone that is completely comfortable in his own skin. And that is a rarity. That's hard to find. And so just wanted to say thank you to Brad Marchand for expressing a lot of the things that a lot of players, I'm sure, feel, but doing it in a way that's not like, hey, woe is me, because obviously people have a lot more difficult challenges in life than what an NHL player is facing. And he just seems to hit the nail on the head every time. So I wanted to give him a hat tip.
Yeah, and you mentioned a lot of players probably feel that way, but don't talk about it. And when mental health comes to the forefront, we need to be having more of these conversations. It's so important, not just in hockey, but in everyday life. So you definitely appreciate the authenticity, both on and off the ice, whether he's being a pest or just being his organic self. There's something so refreshing about that. Well, we've got a lot to talk about the rest of the week, Frank. And as always, we're back here every weekday at 11 Central. We're streaming on X and YouTube as well, which has been so exciting for us. So thank you if you chose to spend your morning with us. And we look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow morning for another edition of Frankly Hockey.